Whispers beyond the door, a forbidden tension that changes everything. The night was supposed to be like any other, a quiet, solitary evening where the world outside the bedroom walls felt miles away. Wrapped in silk and lost in the soft hum of sultry music. I thought I was alone. But then came the creak of footsteps. A shadow at the door. And the flicker of an unspoken emotion that would unravel everything. A gaze that lingered too long. A confession whispered in the dark. It was the moment when boundaries blurred. And the life I thought I knew began to splinter. What happens when temptation walks into the room uninvited? And the line between right and wrong becomes impossible to define. It was a night that blurred every line, leaving me to question what was right, what was wrong, and why my heart had betrayed me. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I relished these quiet evenings, especially since my husband's frequent absences often left the house feeling more like mine than ours. The solitude was both a comfort and a curse, an echo of my independence yet a reminder of the growing distance in our relationship. Tonight, the silence seemed softer, almost like a friend who had come to keep me company. I took my time getting ready for bed, indulging in a long, steaming shower that wrapped me in its warmth and washed away the remnants of the day's weariness. Each droplet seemed to massage my skin, melting away invisible weights I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Slipping into a silk nightgown, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The fabric, smooth as water, clung to my curves in a way that felt both sensual and empowering. It was a piece I rarely wore, meant more for my husband's eyes than my own. Yet tonight, it wasn't about him. Tonight, I wanted to feel beautiful for me. To reclaim a part of myself that had been buried beneath routines and responsibilities. There was something liberating about embracing my reflection. Even if no one else would see it, or so I thought. The bedroom glowed with a soft, golden hue from the bedside lamp, its light casting delicate patterns on the walls. A light breeze floated in through the slightly cracked window, carrying the earthy scent of rain mingled with the coolness of the evening. I pulled back the covers, sliding onto the bed and letting the crisp sheets soothe my skin. My phone rested on the nightstand, its quiet hum filling the room with a sultry rhythm that matched the tranquil yet heightened mood I found myself in. For the first time in what felt like ages, I was entirely in the moment, savoring the peace I had created. My mind drifted, untethered, as I let myself relax into the music. The outside world melted away, leaving only the soft notes, the gentle breeze, and the calming rhythm of my own breath. But then, a sound broke through the tranquility, a faint creak. So soft it could have been imagined. My ears perked up, instinctively straining to identify its source. I dismissed it as the natural groans of the old house and allowed myself to sink back into the soothing ambience. But then it came again. Louder this time, an unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow and deliberate. Moving closer. My breath hitched, my senses sharpening as a prickle of unease traveled down my spine. I turned toward the slightly ajar bedroom door. A detail I hadn't noticed before. I was certain I had closed it. A wave of apprehension gripped me, tightening my chest as my gaze fixed on the door. Now a silent question mark in the room. Then, as if pulled by an invisible string, the door moved. Standing in the doorway was Mark, his figure framed by the faint glow of the hallway light behind him. His expression was a mixture of guilt and hesitation, as though he hadn't meant to be caught. For a moment, he froze. And so did I. Time seemed to suspend itself. trapping us in a charged silence. "Mark," I finally said, my voice sharper than I intended, betraying my surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" His face flushed, and he stumbled over his words, the tension in his posture palpable. I thought I heard something," he murmured, his eyes darting around the room as though searching for an excuse. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. You thought barging in without knocking was the best way to check." I shot back, my voice laced with both irritation and disbelief. Instinctively, I pulled the sheet higher, as if it could shield me from the vulnerability his presence seemed to magnify. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice soft and apologetic. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'll go." But he didn't move. He lingered in the doorway, his gaze flickering toward me before darting away, his uncertainty evident in every gesture. The air between us thickened, heavy with something unspoken. His awkwardness mirrored my own confusion. And yet there was an undeniable tension that neither of us seemed able to break. "Mark," I said again, softer this time, my irritation giving way to curiosity tinged with something I couldn't name. "It's late. You should go." He nodded, taking a hesitant step back into the hallway. But even as he retreated, there was a reluctance in his movements, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't bring himself to speak. "Good night," he mumbled, his voice barely audible before he closed the door behind him. The room fell silent once more. But the stillness was different now. It wasn't the comforting quiet I had relished earlier. Instead, it felt charged, humming with questions that had no immediate answers. My thoughts raced, replaying the moment over and over again, each detail taking on new weight. What had just happened? Why had he come into my room uninvited? And why couldn't I shake the look in his eyes, the way they had lingered, filled with something raw and unguarded? I lay back down, pulling the sheets tightly around me, as though their embrace could shield me from the restless energy coursing through me. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed to carry the echo of Mark's presence. And though I tried to dismiss it, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder if he, too, was lying awake, thinking of me, as I was of him. The words lingered in the stillness of the room, dense with unspoken complexities. My breath caught, sharp and uneven, as heat flushed my face, leaving my chest tight with emotions I couldn't yet name. "Mark," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling beneath the weight of what had just been revealed. But he cut me off, his words rushing out like an urgent confession. "Please," he said, his voice raw and pleading, his eyes locking onto mine. "Please don't be angry. I know it's wrong, I know I shouldn't feel like this. But I can't stop it." The honesty in his voice struck me with the force of a wave, a mix of surprise and disbelief crashing over me. I felt a deep ache settle in my chest, a silent battle between propriety and a dangerous, unacknowledged curiosity that made my pulse quicken. My mouth opened to respond, but my words faltered, caught somewhere between shock and the unspoken pull of temptation. "Mark," I said again, my voice stronger now, though it carried a tremor of uncertainty. "You're my stepson. This, whatever this is, it's impossible. It has to stop here." "I know," he said, his voice cracking under the strain of emotions he could no longer contain. "I've tried to ignore it. I've told myself it's not real, that it will go away. But tonight, when I saw you, I couldn't pretend anymore. His words hit me like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. My fingers gripped the edge of the sheet, the fabric twisting beneath my tightening grasp as I fought to find clarity in the haze of emotions swirling around us. "You shouldn't have come in here," I said at last. But even to my own ears, the firmness I intended fell flat. The words hung limp in the air, powerless against the gravity of the moment. "Go back to your room, Mark. Please." "I can't," he said simply, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "I don't want to." The room seemed to close in on us, the space shrinking as he took a cautious step closer. There was a vulnerability in his movements, a silent plea for understanding in the way his eyes searched mine. And yet, I couldn't move. My body frozen in the limbo between reason and an undeniable pull that both terrified and fascinated me. "Mark," I said softly, my tone faltering. This isn't right. You know that." "I know," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But it doesn't feel wrong." He was so close now that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his presence a force that seemed to wrap around me, unraveling my carefully held resolve. The depth of emotion in his gaze left me breathless, a mix of desperation and something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. His hand reached out, trembling slightly, and his fingers brushed mine where they clung to the sheet. The contact sent a spark through me, sharp and electric, and I flinched, startled by the intensity of it. My eyes darted to his, searching for an answer, for something that might anchor me in the chaos of the moment. "Tell me to leave," he said, his voice thick with emotion, each word deliberate and unyielding. "Tell me to go, and I will. But if you don't..." He trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid, though his meaning hung heavy in the air between us. My heart raced, every beat loud and insistent in my ears as I struggled to form a coherent thought. The logical part of me screamed for this to stop, to sever the connection before it could deepen. But the ache in my chest, the quiet yearning I refused to name, left me rooted in place. "Mark," I whispered, his name tumbling from my lips like a plea, though I wasn't sure what I was asking for. "This isn't fair." "I know," he said, his voice breaking as he stepped closer, the bed's edge now the only barrier between us. "But I can't stop. Not now." His hand hovered near my face, hesitant and trembling as though seeking permission. When his fingers finally grazed my cheek, the touch was so gentle, so tentative, that it made my chest tighten. I should have pulled away. I should have ended it. But instead, I leaned into the warmth of his palm, a silent surrender I didn't fully understand. "You have to tell me to leave," he said again, his voice a raw whisper, his thumb brushing against my skin in a way that sent shivers cascading down my spine. "Because I won't go unless you do." The words lingered, a challenge wrapped in tenderness. And for a moment, the weight of choice hung heavy between us. My lips parted, the protest forming, but the strength to speak it never came. Instead, I found myself reaching for him, my fingers brushing his in a gesture so small, so hesitant, yet unmistakably deliberate. The quiet acceptance in his eyes was both heartbreaking and magnetic. His hand slid to my waist, his grip firm yet careful, as though afraid I might break beneath his touch. The heat of his body seeped into mine as he pulled me closer, the space between us evaporating until there was nothing left but the unspoken truth we could no longer deny. "I don't want you to leave," I admitted finally, my voice shaking with the weight of my own vulnerability. "But I don't know what this means." His lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile, his eyes softening as he nodded. "Maybe we don't have to know right now," he murmured. "Maybe we just let it be." The words carried a quiet promise, a fragile hope that stilled the chaos within me. And before I could second-guess myself, I let go of the final thread of restraint, leaning into the moment as our lips met in a hesitant, searching kiss. It deepened slowly, the tension unraveling like a long-held breath as the spark between us ignited into something neither of us could control. The kiss was electrifying, a surge of passion so intense it left me breathless and clinging to him for support as though he were the only thing tethering me to the earth. In that moment, the world dissolved, leaving behind only the two of us suspended in a fragile bubble of stolen time. It felt both impossibly surreal and profoundly inevitable, as though the universe had been quietly orchestrating this encounter from the very beginning. When we finally broke apart, our foreheads met in a tender touch, a bridge between us as we struggled to steady our breathing. His hands found their way to my back, grounding me, holding me steady in a way that made me feel both safe and utterly exposed. His gaze, deep and unyielding, locked onto mine, and I could see emotions swirling there: vulnerability, adoration, and something deeper, something that seemed to echo the chaos in my own chest. "You're amazing," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The sincerity in his tone sent a shiver through me. "I hope you know that." The weight of his words pressed against me, rendering me speechless. How could I respond to something so raw, so unguarded? Instead of speaking, I let my actions convey what words could not. I leaned in, pressing my lips to his once more, this time with deliberate tenderness. The kiss was slower, unhurried, as if we were savoring every second, every detail, committing it all to memory. Time blurred and stretched, the room around us fading into insignificance as we lost ourselves in each other. His touch was a study in contrasts, gentle but insistent, restrained yet undeniably passionate. Each kiss, each brush of his fingers against my skin, left trails of warmth that seeped into my very being. The room seemed to shrink, becoming a cocoon of intimacy, the soft glow of the lamp casting a golden light that made everything feel both real and dreamlike. "I don't want this to end," he murmured against my lips, his breath warm and tantalizing as he pulled back just enough to search my face. His hands rested on my waist, holding me as though he feared I might slip away. "Then don't let it," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and longing that I couldn't hide. "Stay." A soft smile curved his lips, a mixture of relief and something deeper, a quiet determination. His hands moved to cradle my face, his thumbs brushing gently against my cheeks. "I'll stay," he said, his voice steady and low, resonating with a promise that made my chest ache. "For as long as you want me to." The tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability in his gaze, nearly undid me. I leaned into his hands, letting my eyes close for a moment as I tried to steady the storm of emotions swirling inside me. My heart pounded, each beat a resounding echo in the silence between us. When I opened my eyes, his were still fixed on mine, filled with a mixture of longing and hesitation that mirrored my own. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of his concern. I nodded, though I could feel the tremor in the movement. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. "It's just, this feels like something I shouldn't want. But I do. I want this." The tension in his shoulders eased at my words. And he exhaled deeply, his lips parting slightly as relief washed over him. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to hear that," he admitted, his hands sliding from my face to rest lightly on my waist. "I've been trying so hard to hold back, to convince myself that I shouldn't feel this way. But I can't help it. Being around you, it's like nothing else matters." His confession sent a thrill through me. And before I could overthink it, I leaned forward, capturing his lips in another kiss. This time, it was deeper, more urgent. A culmination of weeks, months of unspoken tension unraveling in an instant. His hands tightened on my waist, pulling me closer until every barrier between us disappeared. The heat of his body, the strength in his arms, all of it anchored me in the moment, making everything else fade away. Time ceased to exist as the kiss deepened, leaving me breathless and wanting more. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were gasping for air, our foreheads pressed together as we tried to find our footing in the aftermath of such intensity. "I don't want to stop," I whispered, my voice barely audible but filled with conviction. "Not now." His eyes searched mine, seeking any sign of hesitation. When he found none, he nodded, his hands sliding up to my back as he leaned in again. This time, his lips moved beyond mine, trailing along my jawline and down my neck. Each kiss ignited a fire within me, leaving me trembling under his touch. "Mark," I breathed, his name spilling from my lips like a prayer. He paused, his lips hovering above my collarbone as he looked up at me, his gaze questioning. "Is this too much?" he asked, his voice low but threaded with concern. "I don't want to overwhelm you." I shook my head quickly, my hands clutching at his arms as if to hold him in place. "No," I said firmly. "It's not too much. I want this. I want you." His expression softened, relief and tenderness blending in his eyes as he nodded. His hands resumed their gentle exploration, guiding me with care. When the backs of my knees met the edge of the bed, I sank down onto it, my breath hitching as he knelt before me, his hands resting on my thighs. "You're incredible," he said, his voice a hushed reverence that sent warmth flooding through me. "I hope you know that." His words struck something deep within me, and I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "I don't feel incredible," I admitted, my voice unsteady. "I feel overwhelmed. But in the best way." He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "You're not alone in this," he said gently. "We're figuring it out together." The reassurance in his voice soothed the storm inside me, and I felt myself relax under his touch. He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead before pulling back to meet my gaze once more. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, his tone serious. I nodded, my heart swelling at the concern in his voice. "I'm more than okay," I said, my hands reaching out to cup his face. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The smile that spread across his face was one of unfiltered relief, a wave of emotion washing over him as he leaned into my touch. His eyes fluttered shut, the moment stretching out as though he wanted to savor every second, every sensation. When his eyes opened again, they held a depth, a fire, That seemed to ignite something within me, making my breath hitch and my heart pound harder in my chest. "Then let's not waste any more time," he murmured, his voice low, carrying a quiet intensity that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in his tone, only the kind of certainty that makes the world fade away, leaving only the two of us. His words lingered in the air, resonating deeply, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. The faint hum of the ceiling fan and the steady thrum of my heartbeat were the only sounds that accompanied the tension between us, now palpable and alive. He stood before me, his hands resting lightly on my thighs, his touch grounding yet electric. His gaze locked onto mine with an unyielding intensity that left me frozen, captivated. "Let me take care of you," he whispered, his voice so soft, so intimate. It felt like a promise whispered to my very soul. The vulnerability in his tone, combined with the quiet power of his words, sent a shiver cascading down my spine. Unable to trust my voice, I nodded, my breath catching as the gravity of the moment enveloped me. Mark's hands slid up my thighs, guiding me gently but firmly, his movements deliberate and careful. The mattress dipped slightly under our weight as I lay back, the cool fabric of the sheets meeting my skin like a soothing balm. My breath hitched again as he followed me down, his presence overwhelming in the best way, filling every corner of the room and my mind. The air between us grew thick, charged with anticipation. Every nerve in my body attuned to him, his movements, his touch, his intent. He hovered above me, his face mere inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. His gaze searched mine, tender yet unwavering, looking for any flicker of doubt. But there was none. There was only want, pure, unfiltered, undeniable. A boldness I didn't know I possessed surged within me, and I reached up, my fingers grazing his cheek. He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing momentarily as though my touch alone was enough to anchor him. "You're amazing," I murmured, the words spilling out unbidden, fueled by the sheer weight of my emotions. "I don't know how you do it, make me feel like this." His eyes opened at my words, and the tenderness in his gaze was enough to undo me completely. "You make it easy," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, each word laden with sincerity. "I've never felt this way before, Nathan. Not with anyone." His confession wrapped around my heart like a soft ribbon, warm and unyielding, pulling me closer to him in every way that mattered. Emotion overwhelmed me, and I pulled him into a kiss, pouring everything I couldn't articulate into the connection of our lips. He responded without hesitation, his hands framing my face as he deepened the kiss. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as though he wanted to commit every detail of this moment to memory. Time seemed to stretch and blur, each second filled with sensations that left me breathless and yearning for more. The weight of him above me was both grounding and electrifying. My hands found their way into his hair, tangling in the soft strands as I held him close, desperate to keep him near. Every kiss, every touch, felt like a revelation, a discovery of something I hadn't known I'd been missing. And yet, through it all, there was a restraint in his movements, a tension that spoke of his careful control, as though he was holding himself back for my sake. "Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling with both need and anticipation. "Don't hold back." He pulled away just slightly, his forehead pressing against mine as he exhaled shakily. "I don't want to rush you," he said, his voice heavy with both longing and restraint. "I want this to be perfect for you." "It already is," I said, my hand sliding down to rest on his shoulder. "You don't have to be afraid. I trust you." My words seemed to unlock something within him, a dam breaking. A flood of emotion rushing through. He kissed me again. His passion now unrestrained. His touch igniting a fire that burned through every part of me. His hands roamed over my body. Firm but gentle. Reverent yet full of purpose. Leaving me breathless and undone beneath him. Time ceased to matter. The outside world fading into oblivion as we lost ourselves in the whirlwind of emotion and sensation that consumed us. As the moment reached its crescendo, I felt a profound connection, a bond so deep it defied explanation. When it was over, Mark didn't move away. Instead, he stayed close. His eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. His voice filled with concern as he brushed a strand of hair from my face. I couldn't speak immediately, overwhelmed by the intensity of what had just happened. His question came again. Quieter this time. Accompanied by a gentle squeeze of my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded, finally finding my voice. "I'm perfect," I said, my tone steady despite the storm of emotions within me. "Because I'm with you." Relief washed over his features, and he leaned down to press a tender kiss to my forehead. Then, he gathered me into his arms, holding me close. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the soothing circles he traced on my back, and the warmth of his embrace felt so natural, so right. As though we had always belonged here. Together. "I don't want this to end," I admitted, my voice barely audible against his chest. "Not ever." "It doesn't have to," he replied. His words a quiet vow that sent a wave of comfort through me. "We'll figure it out together." And as we lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside ceased to matter. In that moment, nothing else existed but us, and the unshakable certainty that we had found something rare. Something worth holding on to forever. As I lay in his arms, the coolness of the sheets beneath us contrasted with the warmth that radiated between our bodies. A quiet intensity that seemed to exist beyond the reach of time. The room held a stillness that was almost sacred. As if the very air around us conspired to hold this moment intact. There were no clocks here. No reminders of the world outside. And yet, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what awaited beyond these walls. For now, though, all that mattered was us, our breaths synchronized. Our heartbeats seemingly aligned. Mark shifted slightly, his fingertips brushing lightly along the length of my arm. A touch so gentle it felt like a whisper against my skin. It was as if he needed the reassurance that I was truly there. That this wasn't some fragile dream that might dissolve at the slightest disturbance. "Nathan," he murmured. His voice so soft it barely broke the stillness. There was a hesitation there. An uncharacteristic fragility that made my chest tighten. Mark, with his usual confidence and poise, suddenly seemed unsure. As though he was treading carefully on unsteady ground. "I meant what I said. This doesn't have to end." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with both promise and uncertainty. I turned slightly to face him, searching his expression for clarity. But as his voice faltered, his grip on me tightened ever so slightly. And I realized the weight of what he was trying to say. It wasn't just a declaration, it was a plea. A hope wrapped in vulnerability. "But what?" I asked. My voice barely more than a whisper. I needed him to continue. To pull back the curtain on whatever thoughts lingered behind those guarded eyes. The vulnerability in his gaze mirrored my own. A raw honesty that made me feel both exposed and comforted. For all his strength, Mark was just as unsure as I was. Navigating the same unfamiliar terrain. He exhaled deeply. His breath warm against my skin. "We have to be careful," he said. His voice tinged with regret. "I know this feels perfect, because it is, but the world outside this room doesn't see things the way we do. They won't understand." His words struck me with a clarity that I wished I could ignore. He was right. Of course. The world beyond this cocoon we had built for ourselves was harsh and unrelenting. Filled with expectations and judgments that neither of us could escape. Yet the thought of hiding what we had, of shielding it from prying eyes, felt like a betrayal of everything we had just shared. "I don't want to lose this," I admitted. My voice barely audible. "I don't want to lose you." Mark's gaze softened. And he cupped my cheek with his hand. His thumb brushing lightly against my skin. "You won't," he said firmly. His voice steady and sure. "I promise you. Nathan. I'm not going anywhere. But we have to be smart. We have to protect what we have." I swallowed hard. The weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. The thought of secrecy, of treading carefully in a world that might not accept us, was daunting. But as I looked into his eyes, filled with determination and unwavering sincerity, I knew I couldn't let fear dictate our future. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling slightly but resolute. "I trust you." Relief washed over his features. And he pulled me closer. His arms wrapping around me with a tenderness that felt both protective and grounding. "Thank you," he murmured, pressing a kiss to my temple. "For trusting me." We lay there in silence for a time. The steady rhythm of his breathing a soothing counterpoint to the chaos swirling in my mind. I tried to anchor myself in the present. To focus on the way his arms felt around me. The warmth of his body against mine. But reality lingered at the edges of my consciousness, refusing to be ignored. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice breaking the stillness. The question hung between us like a fragile thread, its implications vast and uncertain. Mark sighed, his hand moving to brush gently through my hair. "We take it one step at a time," he said. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to be honest with ourselves and with each other." His words were simple. Yet they carried a profound truth that eased some of the tension in my chest. "I can do that," I said, my resolve strengthening. "As long as I have you." "You always will," he replied, his voice steady and sure. The room seemed to shrink around us, cocooning us in a bubble of shared understanding. The world outside faded into insignificance. And for a fleeting moment, it felt as though nothing could touch us. But then, the faintest sound, the creak of a floorboard just outside the door, shattered the illusion. My heart leapt into my throat. And we both froze. Our gazes snapping to the closed door as the sound echoed faintly in the stillness. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark nodded, his expression instantly alert. He sat up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate as he strained to listen. "Stay here," he said softly, his voice low and commanding. "I'll check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm before he could move. "Don't leave." "What if?" Before I could finish, The door creaked open just enough for a sliver of light from the hallway to spill into the room. My heart stopped as a familiar figure stepped into view, Edward. My son. His face was a mix of shock and something else I couldn't quite place. Edward. I breathed, my voice trembling as I scrambled to sit up. The weight of the situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave. For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze shifting between me and Mark, who had turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, and the silence stretched unbearably until he finally spoke. His voice low and hesitant. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. Mark stood, his presence steady and commanding as he moved to position himself between us and Edward. Edward, he said calmly, his tone measured and reassuring. Let's talk about this. Edward's gaze lingered on me, confusion and hurt flickering across his face, before he nodded reluctantly and stepped back into the hallway. Mark glanced at me, his expression softening as he gave me a reassuring nod. Stay here, he said quietly. I'll handle it. I watched as he followed Edward out of the room, the door clicking shut behind them. The silence that followed was suffocating, and I sat there on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding as I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. What had Edward seen? What did he think? The questions swirled relentlessly, each one more terrifying than the last. Faint murmurs of conversation reached my ears, muffled but persistent. I clung to the hope that Mark would find the right words, that he would somehow bridge the gap between understanding and acceptance. Because no matter what happened next, one truth remained unshakable: I couldn't lose him. Not now. Not ever. The days that followed were an intense whirlwind of emotions, an ever-present storm of secrecy, regret, and strained interactions that threatened to unravel me completely. The weight of what had happened that night loomed over everything, an invisible force that seeped into every corner of my life. It was impossible to ignore, yet equally unbearable to confront. I went through my daily routines in a daze, feigning normalcy. But the tension in the house was suffocating, tangible like a heavy fog clinging to every surface. Edward avoided me like I carried a contagion. The sound of my footsteps in the hall was enough to send him retreating into the nearest room, offering muttered excuses that neither of us believed. The effortless camaraderie we had once shared, full of inside jokes and easy silences, had dissolved overnight, leaving behind a brittle, awkward void. Every time our paths crossed, I caught glimpses of the turmoil in his eyes, confusion, betrayal, and something deeper that twisted a knife in my chest. I longed to bridge the gap between us, but fear and guilt held me captive. Mark, though outwardly composed, was not untouched by the fallout. His usual confidence was shadowed by a subtle but unmistakable tension. When we were alone, he became my anchor, his soothing words and unwavering presence a lifeline in the chaos. He held me when I crumbled, his hands warm against my trembling shoulders, and assured me that we would weather the storm together. Yet even in his moments of reassurance, I saw the worry etched into his face, the unspoken burden he carried for both of us. When he thought I wasn't looking, his expression would harden, his jaw clenched against the weight of it all. One evening, after days of agonizing over how to mend the rift, I found Edward on the back porch. The horizon was painted in shades of amber and crimson as the sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across the yard. He sat hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the horizon as if the answers to his pain might be found there. My heart raced as I stepped outside, unsure if I would find the courage to say the things I needed to. "Edward," I called softly, my voice hesitant as it broke the stillness. He didn't turn to look at me. But he also didn't leave. It was a small mercy. But I clung to it as a sign of hope, gathering what little resolve I had. I moved to sit down a few feet away from him, leaving enough space to respect the boundaries he had so clearly drawn. "I know I owe you an explanation," I began, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. My voice quivered. But I forced myself to continue. "What happened? I know it hurt you. And I hate that. I never wanted to put you in this position." Edward let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "Hurt me? You shattered everything I thought I knew," he said, his tone sharp but devoid of malice. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his jaw set in defiance of the emotion threatening to spill over. "Confusing doesn't even begin to cover it." "I understand," I said quietly, though the lump in my throat made it hard to speak. "And you're right to feel that way. You're right to be angry. To feel betrayed. I can't take that away from you. And I wouldn't even try. But I need you to know that it wasn't planned. It wasn't something Mark or I ever meant to happen." At that, he finally turned to face me, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "But it did," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "You both made a choice. And now I have to live with it. I can't unsee what I saw. I can't unknow what I know." His words hit me like a blow, each one a reminder of the consequences we had unleashed. I swallowed hard, blinking back the tears threatening to fall. "I know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm so sorry. Edward. I never wanted to hurt you. But what happened, it wasn't meaningless. It wasn't just a mistake." His eyes bore into mine, searching for answers I wasn't sure I could provide. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice raw with vulnerability. It was a question laced with equal parts pain and longing. And I knew the truth would hurt him more than any lie ever could. "Yes," I said, the word escaping my lips before I could second-guess it. "I do." The truth hung heavy in the air between us, undeniable and irreversible. Edward's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, I thought he might tell me to leave, to never speak to him again. Instead, he let out a long, shaky sigh, his shoulders slumping as if he had been carrying the weight of the world. "I don't know if I can ever be okay with this," he admitted, his voice breaking under the strain of emotion. "But I'll try. For you." Relief and sorrow mingled within me, tears spilling freely as his words sank in. "That's all I can ask," I said, my voice trembling. "Thank you, Edward. You don't know how much that means to me." The silence that followed was heavy but no longer suffocating. There was no resolution, no clean break from the pain. But in Edward's words, there was a glimmer of hope. I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with difficulty. But for the first time in days, it felt like there was a chance for healing. Mark remained my source of strength, though the secrecy of our relationship weighed on us both. We spoke of dreams and distant futures, of a time when we could love each other openly without the shadow of judgment or consequences. The uncertainty was overwhelming. But in each other, we found solace, a fragile but steadfast connection that gave us the courage to face whatever lay ahead. As the days turned into weeks, The fragile threads of our lives hung in a delicate balance. Edward's strained silence, Mark's quiet reassurance, and my own guilt and longing became constant companions. Every stolen glance and whispered word with Mark felt like walking a tightrope, exhilarating yet terrifying. The love we shared was undeniable, but it was overshadowed by the reality of what it could cost us and those we cared about. One evening, as I sat alone in the dim light of my room, I reflected on the path we had taken. Love, no matter how profound, cannot erase the consequences of actions or the hurt it may cause. I knew we had to make a choice, not just for ourselves but for Edward, for our family, for the chance to rebuild trust. Mark and I decided to take a step back, to let time heal what had been fractured. Love requires courage, but sometimes courage means letting go to protect what truly matters. To anyone grappling with difficult choices, remember, it's never too late to pause, reflect, and make decisions that honor both your heart and your values. Love is powerful, but so is accountability. True strength lies in navigating life's complexities with integrity and compassion. Thank you for watching and joining me on this journey of storytelling and reflection. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next captivating episode. See you soon.